Alrighty, interview with Larry Fast at Newark Airport on November 18th, 1976. Larry, your first album, Synergy, is subtitled Electronic Realizations for Rock Orchestra. Even though you perform the entire album all by yourself, are you consciously trying to avoid the image of the one-man synthesizer band?
I suppose so. I'm trying to avoid any kind of imagery, letting it generate its own imagery. I didn't want to conjure up the image of the solo artist being a soloist with this either the ego that let him out of his band or that prevents him from forming a band. I'm trying to let it exist as a new medium entirely by itself.
The word synergy implies getting a lot from economical means, rather like Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion principle.
Exactly. That's where I got it from.
Is that right?
Yep.
Is it true that the bulk of the first album was performed on a mini?
Yeah, just about all of it. I would say essentially everything you're hearing as of any importance on that record is mini mode. And that was mainly a matter of economics at that time. That was the available equipment that was there, and it was perfectly adequate to convey what I wanted to convey. It wasn't necessary except in a handful of cases, which are listed on the liners, to go to anything larger than a mini moog.
So it was not a statement then saying that modular systems are bad, or you weren't trying to prove something by doing it on one instrument alone. It was simply a matter of what you had on hand.
Right. It turned out that it managed to prove that the mini moog was a lot more versatile, I think, than anybody had realized, or at least a lot of people were giving it credit for up to that time. But it wasn't a conscious attempt to do that. That was just a byproduct.
Well, the mini moog was actually designed for stage performance, for live performance. Did you find its rather simple interconnection possibilities a restriction in the studio?
I suppose, yeah. It could be frustrating in its own way because of that, but not extremely frustrating. The basic thought that went into the original design was very good. It might have been geared for live use, but the things were thought out well enough. The internal patching that's given there, the ability actually to go to outboard systems when it's needed, to go to external processors, things other than keyboard control that I've done to go out to any other kind of frequency shifting, filter control, whatever is given to you on the mini moog. It was a very good design. It was very flexible, and it made it quite good for studio use, which I don't think people had given it credit for. Those internal patches were extremely well thought out in their own way. The only thing that gets frustrating is sometimes you want to go beyond that, and that is what led to the second album.
On the second album, then you did use some modular equipment, the synthesizer 15, and some other accessories, right?
Right. That was the 15 and some slight modifications on the mini moog led to something that really amounts to a larger system, because the mini, by the time of the second album, it had enough work done on it that I had added patching capabilities that I felt necessary. The ones that I felt frustrated about on the first album were added by the second album, and the complete patching capabilities of the 15 made what amounted to a fairly modular 6-oscillator, multi-filtered system, multi-envelope generator system, so that it was actually larger in its own. These things seem to grow exponentially, not linearly, when you start making the system modular.
We've talked a little bit about studio performance. Do you do much live performance, and do you consider yourself a keyboard player?
Well, I guess I'd have to consider myself a keyboard player because that's the most convenient way, or has been up till now, the most convenient way to deal with the synthesizer. But everybody knows it, or everybody who knows anything about synthesizer knows it's far from being the only way. And I've worked live. I've done a few tours with Nectar, and I've had offers to do other tours. I've never really seriously considered taking Synergy on the road because I see it as a studio project. I see the records as being the performance. That's where you get to put everything into it. I would have to say I'm a keyboardist by default, only through the live performance. In the studio, though, I don't gear it to the keyboard itself. I think Sequencer's title itself indicates that the sequencer has become part and parcel of the communication between the synthesizer operator or player, whatever you want to call him, and the rest of the machinery, which is going to produce what he's got in his mind. I would think that the ultimate system is going directly from brain to sound, to be able to think it straight out, but we can't quite do that yet.
Biomusic, then.
Let's say we can do it biomusically, but the controlling parameters aren't fine enough, or nobody's practiced enough, maybe we should say, to make it a really viable performance means yet.
The concept of a sequencer, in effect, the musician gives up some sense of control, micro control, for a sort of global control, a macro control. What are your thoughts about that?
I have to agree with you there, but I think that's just first generation sequencers or second generation. The first generation analog ones gave one particular type of limited repeating control, a very limited amount of accessing of output of any kind of intercontrol. The first generation digital ones, which I guess you could say are the second generation sequencer for electronic music, increase that control. Now you've got a chance of doing more than just clock rate and voltage. You have a little bit of editing capabilities on some of them. Some of the correctional digital forms, that anything that can be applied within the limited system that's usually given in them, is available. But again, it can be exploited in an artistic way, and that's what I was trying to do with Sequencer. And I think these are directly opening up the field to the next generation, which will be very specifically controlled microprocessor assisted units, which will be bridging the gap between player piano and synthesizer somewhere. It'll allow for programming capabilities, inserting subroutines, accessing of separate ports. It'll allow for an infinite control, probably more. It'll be the first time you'll get a crossover where the sequencer will definitely be able to do more other than just speed than the player would be able to do.
This is the point that I was making, though, about, quote, infinite control. The control is for the structure of the piece. As far as the actual event, like the vibrato, the nuance of a given line, in essence, when you use automatic devices, don't you give up some of that?
Depends on the automatic device again. If the automatic device is sophisticated, definitely not. It all depends on whether you have the thought to put it in. Now, for people that are into or involved in spontaneous, emotional, direct emotion to compositional or playing work, where the way that a line is played will determine whether they feel the vibrato is put in or not. Well, that's a different mode of thinking. For me, where I'm a very calculating planner when it comes to what I want to put in. I want to know everything that's going on every second. And with this kind of an approach, I think the microprocessor, third, fourth generation sequencers, whatever we want to call them, are where the real fine edge of control is going to finally come in. This kind of thing was brought out in Future Shock, where Tolliver was talking about the fact that computers, rather than simplifying and homogenizing everything so that it will be exactly the same, will actually allow for much more individuality. And I think this will mean that you won't end up tying up your digital sequencer's memory space with a little repeating riff, but you'll be able to tie up one little section of it with the vibrato that goes on 2 notes at the end of line 3, bar 4. And then you'll be able to tie up another piece of memory with opening up another percussive hit that only occurs at 4 intervals. You'll have much more control over the entire project or the bit of music that you're working on.
What kind of equipment are you using right now as far as synthesizers go?
Well, at the heart of all of the analog synthesizer equipment is Moog. It's the 15 modular system. It's that rebuilt mini Moog and a handful of other things. There's a ribbon controller in there. I have some old modules that go back to the late 60s that belong to friends that I borrow and use at times. That's kind of augmented with some Oberheim expander modules. They're really nice little packages when you run out of the big patching system and you still have one more sound left. Well, here's a nice little box you can plug in and whip up a secondary sound on it, and it works very nicely. The sequencers are Oberheim's digital system, which has been slightly rebuilt, mostly just for the start and stop capabilities and a little bit of, well, what they would, in computers you'd call editing with them. It's called fixing the mistakes in it. And they're good. They're really nice little systems, and then everything has been matched so that it ties back into that basic Moog system.
Do you have a Polymoog?
The Polymoog is there. I haven't used it in recording yet. Well, that's not true. I've used it in one studio project, which is the Peter Gabriel solo album. And it was a prototype. It went on tour with me with Nectar, and it enabled a lot of the things that took a lot of time in the studio 2 years ago or a year and a half ago to put down on tape. It never would have been able to pull them off live without the Polymoog, and the Polymoog brought them out completely. I'm still a confirmed modular man. That's not to condemn the Polymoog for the studio. I think it's a great tool, but the nuances and the subtleties that are available for me in the studio, I find are easier for me to relate to with a modular system. I don't need the polyphonic capability myself. I just as soon spend more time and use every device that I need, commit it to one note, and then multi-track and bounce. It might take half an hour as opposed to 10 minutes, and in the long run, I find it more satisfying from a studio point of view.
When you produce sounds that are imitative with a synthesizer, which I hear sometimes on your albums, what is the most important thing that you try to keep in mind?
I don't really know. I hadn't thought about it. Usually when it's imitative, it's because the piece of music requires a sound, and it's a sound that I can relate to in something that I've already heard, rather than relating to it as something that I haven't heard and would fill in. I mean, the sounds are generated both ways. When I'm going to reproduce a sound, then I guess it's just I can hear a sound. I guess any good synthesist can hear a sound and know what went into making that sound the way it did, and then I'll just aim at it. So it's a combination of all those factors that go into it, all the different envelopes that are involved in it.
Mostly experience.
Yeah, experience, and just I guess it's this little calculating way of listening to something and hearing it, and you'll hear the waveforms that are happening. You'll hear which harmonics are more emphasized than others, so that'll determine where you're setting those filters. And it's just an interactive, self-generated program. I don't know. I never try not to intellectualize too much about it. I just go for it with a sound.
I was thinking in particular of the cello sound on the opening of Icarus on Sequencer, your second album. Was that done on a synthesizer?
Yeah, that's synthesized. It wasn't that difficult. I mean, a cello is not that difficult an instrument to do. It's got a very straight ahead sort of waveform that's going on. The filtering, the resonances are something that isn't too complicated either. The wood, the actual bowing effect, and the way that the amplitude shifts depending on the bow, the way you'll have a slight amount of phase error occurring in there. Another piece of equipment I forgot to mention. What's been modified now to be a voltage-controlled phasing device, which started out as one of Mutron's pieces of equipment. But that's in there in a very, very subtle way. You won't hear it as being the typical jet stream phasing or flanging. But it's mostly just to introduce the slightest amount of phase error. But those kind of things are important. That's what makes instruments sound the way they do.
Well, you're pretty well dedicated to studio type performance, if you will. Is that where synthesis is going in the mainstream, or is it going mostly to the stage? What do you think?
Probably both.
Also, you're quite a devotee of electronic instruments, obviously. You must have played acoustic instruments earlier.
Much earlier. Childhood instruments, and also rock and roll guitar for a few years, about 10 years ago, I guess now.
Is there a real argument between acoustic and electronic instrument?
I don't think there should be, but I think a lot of people are trying to make one because it makes either good press or they don't understand it and they're scared. But any argument, definitely, there's no reason for one to push the other out. Nothing's going to replace acoustic instruments. There's no way anything can. There's no reason to bother spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in electronic technology to duplicate something that costs $1.29 in wood and nylon and catgut, and will sound better after 500 years of R&D than anything anybody's going to turn out of a laboratory anyway.
Do you have any advice for people who have an interest in synthesis? How to start? Where to get a leg up on understanding this art?
That's a big one. I suppose if you really want to understand synthesis and not just turn it into another interesting sounding keyboard, which is a viable approach too. I'm not condemning that approach, but if you really want to have it as a true synthesis approach, you've got to understand what's going on inside it. You have to know what's going on behind the panel. And I don't mean down to the fine points of, what the hysteresis on a feedback of an op amp or whatever will be, but I mean just to really understand why a filter is resonating at a particular frequency and what that actually means, and where the cutoff is occurring and how it's happening, what the slope is, that maybe the macro parameters of these subsystems, and understand that. And I think that will make the understanding of sonics in general more apparent, and you'll be able to relate the two, and the whole thing will become a much more interactive system. It won't be so far, and it won't be that you're constantly fighting the synthesizer to get a sound. It'll just be an extension.
What can we expect from Larry Fast? What about your career? What can we see in the future?
Well, I'm working on what we were just talking about before, the next generation sequencers or whatever, because I see them as substituting for my own keyboard playing. I'd rather store systems. I'd rather also, this will give me the capability of working out a lot at home and then dumping onto tape in the studio. I'll be able to store my memory devices at home, work out the parts, not finalize the program, but finalize the compositional end of it at home, not eating up studio time, and then go to the studio, set up a program, and just run it off on a tape, and then come back home and finish some more of it. So this will be a large, it'll be a great big player piano. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be a great big multi-channel, multi-track player piano, which will operate the synthesizer modules rather than going directly from individual to keyboard to synthesizer. It'll introduce a time frame in it that will be able to be stretched or compressed over the compositional.
What about the sociological implications of this kind of thing? I know, of course, everyone won't be doing this, but are we heading towards a time, do you think, where hardly anybody will be interacting with another person to make music, but simply doing it all by himself?
I hope not. I just think that, if anything, maybe it'll siphon off a lot of the bad interaction and only leave the people that really understand the interaction. I don't think you'll ever get rid of a string quartet. I don't think you'll ever get rid of groups of people playing acoustic guitars. It's just too beautiful. It's just too great a form of communication for people, either to the players, to each other, and also to their audience. And I just see this as being another form, a new form of expression, maybe a very individualistic form of expression. I don't think it's any further away from anything that's gone before than, say, the composer sits down and he's scoring out a symphony and he's writing all those little parts for all the different people in the orchestra to play. And he's not really interacting with them on a direct feedback loop. It might be over the course of a few years from the time that he writes that first violin line to the point where some violinist is actually playing it in concert with everybody else and all the other lines he's written. And this is more where I see electronic music going, just allowing that one composer to create his art form in kind of a closed loop situation. He doesn't have to exploit other musicians to play his own part. Everybody can be his own creative genius then and not have to worry about using other people.